Originally from South Africa, Lisa de Nikolits is an award-winning author whose work has appeared on recommended reading lists for both Open Book Toronto and the 49th Shelf, as well as being chosen as Chatelaine Editor's Pick and a Canadian Living Magazine must-read. She is the author of several novels, including The Occult Persuasion and The Anarchist Solution. Her newest book, The Rage Room, will be released in fall 2020.
Hello and welcome, Lisa. I know you have lots of things to talk to us about, and I'm very excited. But the first is, of course, your most recent novel. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that, please.
I would really, really love to, because, of course, you know, with the pandemic hitting, it's kind of like now I have this book coming out and, you know, how am I going to, you know, reach readers? It's going to be somewhat tricky. But the thing is, and I know authors always say this, that this book coming out is the most important book. This novel, which I will hold it up, and this is just a mock-up of the cover, The Rage Room. This is my 10th book. And with every book, I'm like, this is the most important book and it means the most to me. But I have to admit, The Rage Room is the most important book to me. And I'll describe a little bit why. I have a niece and nephew. They live in Australia. Tully is 10 and Grayson is 9. And from the minute that they were born, I've been worried about them. I've been worried about what is the world going to be as they grow up? How are they going to cope with it? You know, what is technology going to be? My little niece is like a superstar on TikTok, which is really cool, but it really worries me. Who's watching her? You know, what is behind the scenes, all these things. So that was largely a part of it, my concern for my niece and nephew. And then the other thing that struck me was by how angry everybody seems in the world. You know, social media developed and it was supposed to be a platform, Facebook friends, like, you know, we're supposed to have a friendly community. And so much of it is so not friendly. It's, you know, people attack each other and there's so much anger. So then I actually started off wanting to write a book about how when you're little and your parents do things for you and you're so small that you don't notice those things. But then I wanted to have some sort of implant in your brain where you could rewind to those good things that your parents did. Like, I remember my mum driving my sister and I when we were very, very little, and we wanted to go somewhere. And we were in a Mini, and it was raining. And my poor mum, like, it was flooding. And I wanted to go back in time and say to her, thank you for driving my sister and me in that perilous little car. And she was so brave. You know, so much of parenting is so brave. And so that was the initial impetus for the book. I called it the Go Back Time Junkies or something. Anyway, but then what happened, as with all my books, it morphed into a very dark time travel, although this is the first time I've done time travel, but all my books go darker than I planned. You know, here there was this feel-good, you know, wanted to thank my mum for the things she'd done when I was a kid. And it turned into a novel where this guy kills his children because he just wants the world to be perfect for them, and he knows it can't be, and he wants himself to be perfect for them as a father, and he's failing horribly on every level. So on the perfect Christmas Eve, he kills them. Then, and this is set in the future, by the way, this is set in 2055. Now, I also firmly believe, and I hope that I'm wrong, that Trump is going to be reelected. So when I wrote...
No, I really hope you're wrong with that.
I
really do.
Hope I am too, love. I actually have $100 bet with my husband. That's our little faith.
I hope he makes up. I hope he wins.
I said to him, I really hope I will pay you the money gladly. I will pay you the money gladly.
Sorry, we got off topic. My bad.
Sorry, but, so I wanted to know, like, so what would this, you know, second term Trump, you know, apocalyptic thing be like? Because it would be apocalyptic. And so that was what inspired the book. Plus the fact that, you know, we're completely abusing our planet with plastic, and where is virtual reality going? So there, Fiona, in a very, very long-winded nutshell, and I really need to work on my elevator pitches, is the thought that went into the rage room.
So is it a crime novel because of the murder of the children, or is it a dystopia? Because it sounds like it's almost like it's a really interesting hybrid.
It is. I would call it speculative fiction, most definitely. So the children, and excuse me, no spoilers, but the children end up fine because the children have to be saved. You know, the children, that is the most important thing. And I won't tell you whether he saves them, because what happens is he jumps back in time. And I'm never writing time travel again. It's terribly, it's so complicated. And when you hook up with time travel aficionados, like, it's a science, right? And I have this really good friend, Colin Frings. My day job, I am an art director, a graphic designer. And Colin and I were working together, and he's really into all this sort of, you know, people adding body parts, you know, sort of accent, I forget how to say it now, you know, adding technology to their bodies to enhance. So he sent me all these websites, very strange things, of people replacing their limbs or getting implants. And the thing was, so then I realized I also wanted to do the time travel, and he sent me all these things on it and wormholes. So I didn't understand it. So I worked very closely with him, and he was very, very strict. He's a young guy, he's probably one of my best friends. And so he sent me back to the drawing board countless times. Like, no, this is how time travel works. You can't fake it. You can't pretend, you know, there are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts. So yeah, I would call this speculative fiction. I have a very nice cover blurb from Terry Fallis that I could read if that doesn't sound too, because other people always sum up my books better than me. He said, a pulse-pounding thriller set in a troubled future that might just be ours. So, and he also liked it because it does have some dark comedy to it. A lot of my work has this twist to it that I never intended to be there, that kind of pops out. So
that sounds fascinating. I certainly, I'm sitting there. Our grade 12 course actually does a whole speculative fiction dystopia, and it sounds like this might be a really nice little addition for that.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
So I know you've got lots of other stuff on the go. You asked if you could talk about the collective you belong to, and you've also asked if you can talk about your review site. So
yes.
Would you care to share those things with us?
Yes. So I think what the most important thing, well, one of the most, is the Minerva Reader. So many years ago, well, 2017, I realized that there were so many books, candlelit books being published that weren't getting any recognition because, you know, as I mentioned, I work for magazines, and magazines are not reviewing, not in any measure as they were before. Newspapers are not reviewing in any way like they were before. So I figured I could start the site, the Minerva Reader, and I could, in a small way, read books and then try and put the word out there for these unsung heroes, which is what books that people might have missed, treasures you might have missed. And so for me, it's a really important endeavor. And, you know, I keep doing it because I really feel that sharing the love, and that's what you guys are doing, which is so amazing. And I feel like if we're going to keep books alive, it's the camaraderie and us spreading the word of each other, because the world is changing. So this is the future. You know, my site, your endeavors, things like this. This is how we get the word out there for the book. So it's called the minervareader.com, and I really hope people will check it out. So it's to me a very important personal project. So
that sounds wonderful. I have a very low-key book blog as well, and I think you're right. It's this, basically it's word of mouth, and especially those of us who love the written word, that's the only way I think we can keep things we can just keep things real and immediate, and our passion comes through, I think, when we do these projects. And And yeah, it's so wonderful. And you're right, there's so much that we miss. I mean, I just know that a number of times people say to me, well, have you read this book? And I find that if I don't get to it in the first 6 months of publishing, I almost never get a chance to go back.
Yes.
Because there's so much coming forward all the time. You know, your to be read pile just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's threatening to take over my house right now. I think I need to give it a name, not Audrey. So I was wondering, it talks about what do you wish you had known, or what do you know now with your 10th book that you wish Lisa with her first book had perhaps known better?
Oh my goodness, so much. I think what I really wish the most is when I started off, grew up in South Africa, and I did a Bachelor of Arts with the University of Toronto. And I was supposed to do English and psychology, but then I discovered philosophy. And of course, you know, probably one of the most useless degrees one could ever have. But the thing is, studying English literature, it doesn't prep you for creative writing. So if I could have time traveled myself, because in those days in South Africa, there were no creative writing courses. So how I dearly wish that I had been able to learn the craft, because from a young age, probably English was the only thing I was ever good at. It was the only thing I ever cared about. So in the classroom, the teachers would get really annoyed with me because I daydreamed through everything except English, and basically got A's in English and C's in everything else. So, because I just I don't care about the rest. So the thing was, I really wish that I had had the opportunity to study the craft of it, because I had lots of encouragement. People were like, you know, you're a really good writer. You must follow through with this. Well, what does that mean, follow through? So I just kept writing, you know, stream of consciousness stuff. So I really wish I'd been able to study the craft of writing. And in Canada, there's so many amazing courses, and you can study with mentors, and, you know, so that's what I really wish.
It's and it's that, how do they go together? Because when I talk to other writers, they're also voracious readers for the most part.
Yes.
So part of learning the craft is reading the craft of others.
Yes.
And so I guess my question, I have two-part question. Do you have a favorite book as a child, or a favorite character as a child? And then what's currently on your bedside table?
Well, I would say the first book that made me realize I want to be a writer, and I was struck by the writing of the book, was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith.
Yes.
And I can reread that book. Even now, just talking about it gives me goosebumps, because the characters and the sadness and the poignancy of it. Francie Nolan, I felt like I was Francie Nolan. And for me, I remember I was sitting on this little brick wall, the sun was shining on me, I was really young, and I was like, someone wrote this that had this impression, made this impression on me, and what if I could do that? It was just so beautiful. And so that is, yeah, my first book. A book that I read recently that I tweeted about and said it went straight to my marrow was Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood. And I got that from actually a little library, you know, the free little libraries that one finds. And I actually found a few where they almost cater to what it is that I like. So I go and forage there. And that book, my word, that just blew me away. And that was a very, very recent read. I've also very recently, I got stuck reading this book. I fell into it. You can see it's pretty big, because I'm somewhat obsessed with Leonard Cohen, and now I'm chatting to dead Leonard Cohen, and sometimes Leonard Cohen answers me back. And then this is on my to read list because I just love Charles Bukowski so much. And then this is my next read as well that I'm really looking forward to. And I love a thick book. You know, this means I'm going to have a lot of pleasure for some time. I'm a very speedy reader, so I fall into things pretty fast.
Wow, those are great. So the other thing we talked about a little bit, you said your publisher, Inanna Publications, they've been so supportive for you. And so I wanted to, have you always been with them? How have you developed this supportive and positive relationships? Because that's not necessarily an industry norm where there's real collaboration, and it, like, the author will say that about their publisher. Sometimes it is, and it's great to hear that, but I've also heard not that.
Well, I've been really, really lucky. So I came to Inanna by way of a rejection from Second Story Press. So, you know, I'd been writing my whole life and applying and going, you know, suffering the rejections, which, as we know, are really quite soul destroying. And then I got a rejection letter from Second Story Press. And it was a really nice rejection letter. And so I replied to it. And of course, you're never really supposed to reply. And I just said, like, wow, that makes me really sad. I was really hoping that you would be interested in the book. And they were like, well, we were interested, but we're looking for more of a YA bent. But why don't you try Inanna Publications? And I'll admit that at that point, I hadn't heard of them. So I submitted the book to them, and I'll never forget that moment of joy when I read the email from Luciano Riccitelli, and I cried. I absolutely cried. I said to my husband, because I was sitting on the bed with my laptop and sitting there crying, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I've never been happier." So anyway, and I think the thing that I love so much about Inanna is all my books are very, very different. They have a few things in common: strong female protagonists and a really strong sociological issue. So, for example, The Nearly Girl, which is perhaps my most autobiographical novel to date, is about a girl with a disorder where she gets things nearly right, but she doesn't get them quite right, which is a lot me. I get on the wrong buses and do all sorts of things. And I thought when I came to Canada that Toronto was where Vancouver is and that New York was south of that. So just to give you an idea. So the books are all very different. You know, there's Between the Cracks She Fell, which is about a girl who becomes homeless, and The Witchdoctor's Bones, which is about actually Muti murders, which are where, you know, small children in Africa are killed for their body parts, which are put into spells. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And I really want to write a sequel to The Witchdoctor's Bones. So all 10 books have been so very, very different. The thing with Inanna is they really develop me. And that's the thing. If I look at my first book and what it was, I mean, I think largely Luciana really, she fixed that book. She made that book what it is. I mean, when I stepped away and realized like what she'd done, and she explained to me, look, this is what I had to do. And, you know, she taught me about timeline, and I learned so much. And so with every book, I learn more. And it's a very, for example, with The Rage Room, I initially sent them a book and they were like, well, this could work. And then they sent me a 2-page sort of breakdown as to what I'd need to do. I had to do a lot of work. So basically rework, you know, plot, move things forward. So it's a very collaborative thing. And I feel very safe with them because I know that they're going to guide me in a way that will get the best possible book. So I'm very, very lucky that way.
That's lovely. It's one of the, so as I work with artists and talk to people, one of the things that I really, it gets my back up now, I think I have to say, is that the people still have this very romantic idea of artists, like almost like literally romantic, like from the 1850s, where there's like this inspiration and you're all just creative people and it's just because you're talented. And I keep trying to say to people who make those assumptions, no, it's an incredible amount of work. It's an incredible amount of discipline. Musicians, artists, writers, they have a passion and a craft, but they have worked so hard to develop that craft. And it's not just this, you know, divine inspiration or something weird like people think. And it really, I find it really annoys me. It's because there's so much work. And as I talk to people more and more, it's that work and discipline that really makes a difference, it would seem. So I kind of come.
I can't agree with you more. And I just want to say, like, I'm just, to your point, I like keep these little sporting analogy things that I found at work and things like, you know, anytime you try to win everything, you must be willing to lose everything. I have all these little sporting stickers because, oh, sorry, I just bumped my computer. Because in a way, it's like, athletes, right? You see how hard athletes work and the discipline it takes there, and the blood and sweat that goes into it. So yes, it's probably more work than I would even care to. Sometimes I stop and think about how much work it is, and I think, goodness, why do it? But then it's because you can't not do it. So yes, I'm totally with you there. Yes.
And I find that, your sports analogy is interesting because I think there's a gendered thing to the whole. The arts tend to be women and the sports tend to be men.
Yes.
And we are allowed to see the sweat and work there, but we aren't allowed to see the sweat and work on the other side. And I think there's an insidious kind of sexism at play there too, that we could go down that rabbit hole for quite a while.
Good. And another thing, just because when you sent the questions and you were like, what was the first book you read? And what popped into my mind was Sleeping Beauty, because I had like this little Sleeping Beauty that I fell in love with Prince Charming. And when I was very little, I had to go to sleep with the book open. And I was thinking about, after your questions, I was thinking, basically, that is really terrible. Like, some guy wanders along, and just because he's wearing a shiny crown, he kisses this girl who's in a coma. And I think about all the things that, we've learned from such a very young age, things like that, like, lying there in your coma waiting to be rescued by a prince. So yes, and that's all, the sports guys, we watch them sweat, but not the women. And there's so many things all around us that I'm trying to untangle because it's just not right.
There's a lot of work still to be done.
Yes.
So the next question I was looking at is your creativity. So I know obviously that comes from work. Where do you find your inspiration? And could you kind of allude a little bit to kind of current events and current things that you find we really need to look at as a society? But then in these pandemic times, have you found that's helped your creativity, or has it made it more difficult for you to tap into?
I think for me, I'm like one of those horses in a race that wears blinkers. And that's how I've always actually run my life. The race of my life has been run with blinkers, because I've always been like, you put your head down, you watch your feet in front of you, and off you go. So when the pandemic hit, there was the temptation to kind of go like, well, do we push things aside? And then I thought, no, writing's the thing I love the most. Why would I do that? So no, my philosophy with the pandemic is to basically try and act as if, as if it isn't happening to the most that I possibly can when it comes to my creativity. I have this motto: do one thing a day for your writing, every day, just one thing. And it can be scribble down something on a Post-it note, or it can be some days I get really lucky and I write like 7,000 words. So, but every day I do one thing. And so I thought, you know what, just stick with your rule, okay? Don't change your rule. It's not overwhelming. And so for me, I find solace in the writing. One of my friends, Carrick Publishing, put out a call for an anthology called The Grave Diagnosis, which and all the stories had to be medically related. The crime had to be involved, and a lot of the reaction on social media was like, "That's the last thing I want to think about." I'm like, "Oh, for heaven's sake! This is an opportunity to write a story." Like, for me, it's always about the opportunity. So I had nothing at that point. I'm like, so, all right, but what are you going to write about? And I actually have some very noisy neighbors. And now, of course, we're all living on top of each other because it's the pandemic. So I was like, oh, imagine if I could kill the neighbors. Anyway, so I wrote a short story in which I kill one of the neighbors. So that's how the pandemic did help me, gave me the thought for that. So.
Remind me not to move close. No, the standing joke is I live in Caledon, and there was a time, it's not happened recently, but there was a time where there were no murders in Caledon, but that's where they'd find the bodies.
Right.
And so, and the premise is very simple. It's just the things are happening in the cities, and they drive north, and Caledon's the first place where you don't have
bodies.
Well, you don't have the street lights at every corner, and it's the first place where it's that's the closest north place that's still dark. And so you can,
Wow.
but the funniest, I mean, it's not funny to dump bodies, but the funniest thing is that somebody dumped a 4-foot long alligator in a ditch, like a dead alligator body. And yeah, anyway, that's
Oh,
great.
Fiona. Now
But
there's a great idea for a story. Who dumped the alligator body and why?
and where did they get a 4-foot long alligator?
Yeah.
How do you hide a 4-foot long alligator? Anyway, you should come up and visit and see if it inspires.
Yes. I do have a fascination, I have to say, with exploring things like that. I think on my husband's and our first date, we went for a walk along the edge of Lake Erie, and I found these sort of rotting fish carcasses because he's a photographer and I'm interested in photography. So he sees me and I'm enraptured by these things. He comes over like, "What have you found?" And I show him this rotting, decaying fish. Anyway, so 14 years later, we're still together. So I would love to see your alligator.
So the last question I would like is what do you have any specific advice to readers, other than buy your book, which is obvious, in order to keep this love of words, this love of print and the Canadian industry alive, because it's, things are tough.
Yes, firstly, the libraries, because the libraries are the most amazing place. Get your books from the libraries. I know I should be trying to sell them books, but the libraries are so amazing. And so check out books from the library. And here's what I think. Sometimes I'll pick up a book and I'm not in the mood to read it at that particular moment. It just doesn't resonate with me. So I will put it aside, send it back to the library, put it back in my to read pile, because if you don't feel like a book at that particular moment, it doesn't mean that book is not right for you or that you won't read that book down the line. So I've certainly stopped pressurizing myself to finish a book the minute I start reading something. I'll just say to myself, well, you know what, maybe I'm not in the mood for it right now. And then I put it down. And then a couple of months later, this little earworm will start bugging me. Like, hey, remember that book that you started? So I think that would be, my advice to readers is sometimes you pick up something and it doesn't immediately appeal. So don't, think you either have to finish it or never go back to it. Maybe come back to it at another time. So
I like that. I like the idea that there's no absolutes. I mean, once these books are in the world, they're there,
yes.
And you can take them as you need them or as they come to you.
Yes, as they come to you, because books come to you, I really feel this, at a time when they have a message that you want to be reading for whatever reason. And so that's why books are so magical, because like Cat's Eye, when I found that, I looked at it and thought, oh, let me try this. And that book devoured me. So, and it was almost a mystical experience connecting with a book to that degree. So,
and it's from the 80s, right? It's from quite some time ago.
From quite some time ago. And I mean, if readers go to the Minerva Reader, they'll see a lot more of my recent reads. So I have a really bad memory and I find it hard to remember that I'm a voracious reader. I read maybe 4 books a week, except for Leonard Cohen. He took a little while longer because that was a really big book. But, I read 4 books a week and then I try and review, as many as possible that I can. And I also have an initiative on Goodreads, which is called Interview with an Author, where I ask authors some questions. All of those are currently on hiatus a bit because I'm working on, getting the Rage Room ready to come into the world. But that's another thing, Goodreads is a good way to find books and, just keep looking at things and seeing what resonates with you. And then if a title resonates or something, then pick up the book. So what I do.
I love Goodreads. I also use 50 Book Pledge, which is a HarperCollins tool. But I like them because, like you, I'm at times a voracious reader, and I love the visual of it, where you can see the cover again, and then you're kind of like, oh yeah, I remember that. And they're very powerful tools just to help us organize and remember what we've read and the connections we might have made.
Yes, it's very difficult sometimes I also wish that I could organize my books more and my reading more. But then I read so much, it would be very difficult.
Thank you so much for your time. I want to wish you the very best with the launch of the Rage Room. And it sounds fascinating, actually. And And yes, thank you so much for being part of this opportunity and for sharing your work with Canadian readers. And hopefully we can continue to support each other.
I hope we will. Thank you very much for having me today.